everyone. Welcome to our December SIGUCCS webinar. Peter Wallace and Michelle Martinez are here from the University of Washington, and they'll be speaking on motivating skill-based promotion with badges at the University of Washington. By default, everyone is muted, so if you have a question for Peter or Michelle, please feel free to just send that to me using your chat option, and I will let Peter and Michelle know that you have a question. So with that, let's go ahead and start the webinar. Michelle and Peter, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. Okay, is our screen showing okay?
Yes, it is.
All right, great. So I'm Michelle, and
I'm Peter.
and we've got our webinar here. Our title of our webinar is Badges. We Need Them Stinking Badges.
So the first thing we're going to want to walk you through is just a little bit of background as to who we are, who our staff is, and some basic understanding of the situation into which we are inserting badges and why we need them.
So our unit in UW Information Technology is called Learning Technologies. We are heavily reliant on student staff. As you can see from our photo here, a majority of our staff are students. We've got about 8 FTE, and the rest, we've got close to 50 student staff working on several different teams. So we have a help desk team, we have an instructional workshop team, we have a learning management system support team, we have a systems team, it goes on. So students are our focus, and they're our bread and butter. We can't function without them. Okay, we have actually close to 60. We also have a unique setup here on campus. We have the largest computer lab anywhere on campus in Seattle here. We have close to 400 computers in the Odegaard Learning Commons, and we also have several specialty spaces. We have a sound studio where students can come and do all sorts of sound mixing and recording, lots of high-end equipment. As well as we have a media production area for video editing and things like that. So, you know, we need a lot of expertise, and we need our student staff to gain this expertise so that they can help support these specialty spaces. The other big thing that we do is a service called Computer Vet, where people can bring in their laptops, and in some occasions we've had people bring their desktop computers in to get troubleshooting on software issues. That's actually what my staff does. I'm the help desk supervisor, and my staff will troubleshoot software problems like viruses and other things like that.
And I'm more involved in the web spaces, so we also, our students, about 25 of them, also support Canvas, Catalyst, which is kind of a homegrown LMS system, Integrity. Both Canvas and Integrity have really only been rolled out on our campus over the past 2 years, which, as you might imagine, saw a tremendous increase in the amount of knowledge and skill that we needed our students to have, going from a system that was homegrown where they could ask the developers questions in private chat as they're researching problems to cloud-based systems. We also saw a huge increase in the number of research and pilot systems that we were doing, and just a general increase in the diversity of questions about teaching with technology that we were getting on the learning management side.
So part of our problem was that since about 2008, the state went under a wage freeze when when the economy started to crash, and so we didn't have a way to motivate students just by money, basically, right? People who had been here for a long time couldn't just get a raise based on seniority. So we had to kind of switch to a skill-based promotion system, because the only way to get a raise was to actually have a new job with new responsibilities and higher responsibilities. This actually works better because it's really great for people who are new to the team, because they can just work their way up. If they're motivated, they can just go through and get their promotions and feel as valued and appreciated as someone who has been here for a long time. So it actually turned out to be a benefit. So our first attempt was something called iPromote. This was here actually before I started. It's a long acronym. It stands for Interactive, Progressive, Results-Oriented, Modular, Ongoing Training Experience. It's a mouthful, and it had some good things and it had some bad things. We had specific tasks in projects that we would assign to kind of prove the student's knowledge in something. Some of these projects were actually useful to us. For instance, we have a graphics track, so we would have a student create maybe pamphlets or flyers, brochures, posters, things like that that we need for marketing, and those were really useful for us. But then we had other things like our web track, where our project consisted of creating the same website over and over again just to prove that you knew how to build a table or you knew how to do CSS. So that was less useful, and not surprisingly, fewer people utilized that because they kind of saw that, oh, once I make this website, nothing really happens with it. They're not doing anything with it. It's just into the ether. So that was part of our struggle with that specific project-based work. Despite some of what we saw as benefits were, getting that promotion, the higher pay, and also scheduling priority, we didn't have very many people taking advantage of it. So just as a quick example, this is our audio track project. And as you can see, it's very overwhelming just looking at this wall of text. And so I can, myself looking at it, I can understand why, a student who's got, maybe 15 credits and they're involved in other clubs and social life and things like that, and they look at this and they're like, whoa, well, I could get a raise at work, but I have to do all of this. So, it's understandable. Okay, but how do we really motivate them in that case? So if the money isn't just enough, and if the scheduling priority isn't enough to make someone want to do iPromote, obviously there's something wrong with our system. How do we motivate them?
So we started kind of turning to and thinking about gamification, and our initial thoughts along this line weren't just limited to badges. We wanted to kind of think about how we could make a lot of the things that can be dull about the work more exciting. So point system, integrating some amount of recognition for tardies and absences, and earning rewards from those points aside from the badges, but we really looking at the overall availability of systems, what's out there. Badges seem to be a strong starting point that a lot of people were talking about, and a place where we could explore and kind of share back to the community as we're trying to do now. I will also say that this has been an adventure of kind of many fits and starts. I think that's the benefit of piloting things, is you get a really good idea of what goes into one of these systems. So we are going to demo now, if the technology works, the basic badge system that we have set up, and talk a little bit as well about just what we want to improve and where we want to go from here. So this is our current badge system. It's on an internal server. The students can all get to it. It's in the same place as their punch clock and scheduler. When we originally wrote the article for SIGUCCS, we were hoping to have a badge system up and running and rolled out by then, but we hit a few bumps in the road. The first one is that our original badge system that we were working with, which was from Seton Hall University, we couldn't abstract out the authentication piece of that in order to get it to work with our authentication system here. The authentication was done essentially in fits and starts throughout the program rather than being in one piece that we could take out, replace with our own program. So this, we created this off of Django Badger, which is an open source available GitHub project for badges. You can see the badges that are currently available here, and there are Sound Studio badges like the Input Output Pro badge. There are also badges that we created just for fun with some of our students. We're playing games in our games area and could earn some badges for that as a way of testing the badges. Students could also earn this milestone badge by creating a badge. So you can see the basic pieces that go into these badges here. You get a description, which is the criteria for it, who created it, when it was created, if there are any prerequisites. That's an important part I'll talk about more later. I can also, because I'm in admin view here, I can award this badge and select one of our users to award it to, and I can edit the description if I need to. If I want to go create a badge, there's just the Create a Badge button. Give it a title, an image, that criteria I was talking about, whether or not I want to limit it to one per person, any prerequisites, and then the Create a Badge button. Now,
Peter, this is Beth. We just have a couple questions.
Great.
I think the badging system was called Tango Badger. Is that correct? And
Django.
that was open source? Django.
Django. Let me actually see. Here's the GitHub project for it, for anyone who's interested.
Great, thank you. And I think it was just actually what are the components of the badging system. So they give you basically the framework, and then you go in and personalize it?
That's correct. So Django Badger will give you essentially the Django backend and the Python front end of the badge system with some very basic HTML and CSS to display, and then you kind of go in and update and edit a lot of that.
Great, thank you. I think that answered those couple questions. If not, just send me a chat, folks.
Great, happy to answer questions as we go. Thank you. So one of the major issues we also ran into is within the system, how did we want to make sure that students had done what they said they'd done to get a badge, and how were we going to track that and award badges quickly and easily instead of scrolling through a list of our 60 students. So we created Canvas courses, and within Canvas, one of the options that we have is that we can actually display a website within the Canvas frame through an iframe. And so what we've done here is that students, when they complete this module, they can open up the next module which says Claim Your Badge, and it will load up our back-end badge system within that, and the badges have been kind of pre-awarded to that system. So this is a URL that pre-awards those badges. We also have other modules where they have to submit a file or a URL to our staff through the LMS, and then we go into the badge system and award that badge after they've submitted the file. And that's for the more skills-based badges. We want to be able to control exactly who gets that badge, because the badge needs to remain valuable to the students who are getting it and not kind of decline. So I'm going to stop the demo there. Are there any more questions about what we went through in the demo, or what those systems look like and how they interact?
None that I see right now, Peter, but I'll just wait a few seconds to see if anybody sends something in.
Yeah, and obviously if there are, we're also happy to handle them at the end or anything like that.
Okay, no questions have come in so far.
All right, so I'm going to continue, and we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming issues, the things that we're still trying to deal with, the things that if you want to start a badge system you might be faced with or might be able to help solve. So here are the basic pieces that go into a badge as it currently lives in the Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure, right? The badge needs a name, it needs a description. That description should contain some sort of criteria. What does the person have to do to get this badge? Who the issuer is. So, right, this badge comes from Learning Technologies at the University of Washington. Who is it blessed by? Is it blessed by, I know Code Academy is doing some things like that. Ideally, there would be some evidence attached, right? Here's what the student submitted to say, yes, I really do have these skills. A date issued, And then there's some standards and tags that can go into a badge, but most of these things, but especially standards and tags, really haven't been solidified in any way. There isn't a standard to which they live. They're just created on the back end. And this is true to a large extent of criteria and issuer as well, right? This is kind of an ongoing problem in the history of badges. I'm just going to make a shout out here to a favorite article of mine for those of you really interested in nerding out about badges. I highly recommend Monstrous Moral Hybrids, A History of Badges, which is an article by Alexander Halves, and he talks about badges throughout history. What you see here are actually the badges of different royalty and heraldry throughout history, and he goes into the issues that were seen then with who issued the badge, right? How did people get that badge, and how that sometimes declined motivation to getting those badges because one person would have to work really hard and would go on a pilgrimage and do this whole thing and, you know, get their badge at the end of it, and another person would have enough money, right, to get their badge, and that undermined the problems of badges. And I think we are seeing some of the same issues today, right? If one student can get a badge very quickly and easily, another student has to struggle for it. That imbalance is going to create a difficulty. And Halves goes through not only the medieval part of badges and pilgrimage badges, but also badges that were issued by Winchester, the Boy Scouts, different organizations like that. Of course, part of the question is, right, what is the ultimate badge? Who gets to decide what the biggest badge is, or who the badge issuer should be? And I think this is a problem that we're continually running into, because we want our students not just to be able to get badges, but ultimately to be able to give badges to other students, because we are so heavily weighted on the student side of these systems. But in order to decide which students get those badges, we need some understanding of the criteria that feeds into badges and of the hierarchy of those badges, right? Can you get a, you know, help desk expert badge or a badge expert badge that really makes you ready to give out those badges? And I think that that's just kind of a general struggle in the field. What are the criteria? Who can be the issuers, or who can set the criteria for these badges? One of the big concerns that's going into this is kind of this idea of badge inflation, right? If we offer a tremendous number of badges, will the value of each badge go down, and the motivation coming into getting those badges continue to go down as well? I can say from our limited experience to start with, our badge system and the motivation to get badges kind of moves in fits and starts. If we're really pushing the idea of badges from the full-time employee standpoint, students are more excited and interested in getting badges. If we aren't pushing it, it just kind of falls off the radar and isn't as interesting, even though, you know, there's an element of it being tied in to priority for promotion and things like that. That's an issue we're dealing with. It's an even bigger issue, I think, in the kind of broader conversation around badges. This is an image to represent what Kyle Bowen called carpet badging, which I think is a really great phrase for it. It's the problem of, right, okay, we'll create a badge system. It's fairly easy to, you know, to create badges. It's much harder to award a badge intelligently, so we'll just put up QR codes around every event that we do, and every event that you attend will become a badge, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you've got hundreds and hundreds of badges out there in the system, and each of them doesn't necessarily mean a lot. That's a big issue that we're looking at. Helping us look at it, Sean Fullerton from the Information School at the University of Washington. We really appreciated his participation in this and pointing us to different research. He works with Katie Davis's group. There's a URL there if you're interested in researching that further. And that's about it. I know that we have plenty of time left for questions. So are there any questions in the queue?
Peter, this is Beth. One question I have as I was watching your presentation. Do you feel that the badges tie into competency at all? So, for example, if you had a new student come in at the help desk and they never kind of achieved any badges, is that acceptable? Or do you think there's a way in which you could put a structure in place so that over a period of time there's a certain requirement or a minimum competency that any student has to kind of meet?
I think I'll speak to that a little bit. I guess the ideal, so what we do now is we have people start as what's called a student assistant, and then they work their first quarter, and that's basically considered they're in training still. After that, they do have a quiz that they have to take is their basic competencies, and if they pass that quiz, they are promoted to a full consultant, help desk consultant. So my goal is to tie the badges to that. So like you have to earn, X amount of badges in order to get that promotion to consultant, and these badges are in these, core competency areas. That's my dream anyway.
Great,
Yeah,
thank you, Michelle.
We're approaching badges very much from the idea of competency and less from the idea of attendance. Which I think is one of the ongoing debates that I've seen in who's awarding badges and how they're awarding badges. It would be fine if someone came in, started at the help desk with no badges, but we would want to see them earning badges as they matured, and we're especially looking to create badges that make explicit some of the things that some of the training that they need that isn't currently covered by our training system.
Great, thank you. Alan is wondering, is there a pay scale based on badges or purely gamification and pride?
There is a pay scale promotion sort of thing. That's, again, the dream. Right now it's still kind of, in the beginning stages, but right now we have 4 areas that we need specialization in for the help desk anyway. We have that graphics track I mentioned. We have an audio track. We have a video editing track, and we have a web programming design track, because those are areas where we occasionally get more kind of advanced questions, and we need our students to have that expertise. So the goal would be that they would earn badges in that area that prove their knowledge, say in audio production. They would earn however many badges are needed that we see fit to earn that promotion, and then yes, they become a senior consultant in that audio specialty, and I think it's like a 75-cent raise at that point, and it goes on. We have a senior 2 that's like another $1 raise, and things like that.
And we're seeing that within the LMS, Learning Management and Lecture Capture help as well, that badges would be very closely tied to promotion. I think one of the things we're interested in that we haven't been able to test yet is, and I know that kind of keeps coming up, right, the stuff that we're interested in that we haven't been able to test yet, but we really want to know whether students are more motivated if they have a clear pathway to that promotion, right? Instead of, okay, here's a bunch of stuff that you need to do in the sound studio, or here's a bunch of stuff that you need to know about Catalyst, Canvas, Integrity, breaking it down and saying, here's the small thing you need to know, learn this week, get this badge, and then you'll move on to the next thing you need to know, and then you'll move on to another thing the next week, and making it kind of a much more linear, gradiated pathway towards that promotion. But it's very much aimed at making sure that the people who are being promoted have really great skills.
I think the other thing I want to add really quick, I also can find it very useful because I do quarterly staff reviews, right? So it's a way to gauge their engagement, their motivation, as well as with that gamification idea, we also have this huge goal of maybe like a points system where they can earn, I don't know, a free absence, like if they, oversleep, and that happens from time to time, but there are consequences for that. Maybe if they have enough points, they can earn their way out of that. Things like that I really would like to explore.
Mm-hmm. Michelle and Peter, and I don't know, maybe you can flip back to the actual live demo of the badges, but do you have actual examples of the granular step-by-step that one would need to progress? And kind of a related question is, how did you actually define the badge criteria? How much time and effort went into kind of defining the badges and identifying the specific skills that were necessary in order to achieve a badge?
That's a great question. I'll deal with the second part first, if you don't mind. We are still very much undergoing that designing of badges question. And we are doing it in participation with Sean Fullerton from the iSchool, the developer, Craig Stimmel, for our badge system, and some of our student employees who are experts in those spaces. We see student participation as being really important for this process, especially since, right, we're far enough out of school that we don't know exactly what it takes to start up at the help desk. And so we're asking students who are starting up at our help desk or our LMS help desk to tell us more about exactly what they need to know and what their criteria is and would be. So a couple of examples to maybe clarify that a little bit. The criteria for this image investigator badge that they could earn in a Photoshop workshop was kind of identified by our graphics and design workshop instructor, who's a student, who's an expert kind of in graphics and design, and he wanted to granulate and kind of pull out the piece of learning image editing that is finding an image that you can edit, so the Creative Commons idea. So he said in his workshop, essentially, okay, here are a few different ways of doing a Creative Commons image search. Take one of those URLs just to prove that you can do it, submit it through this assignment. And they submit through that assignment, and we can look at the back end, and there actually were students who submitted things that weren't Creative Commons, weren't reused with modification, things like that. As another example, right, we move from that to, okay, now take the image that you have, go to the next step, which is continue to follow along in this workshop, take that image, turn it essentially into an overlay on a wall, then combine those in Photoshop and upload those, and we'll award you a badge if you've shown that you can basically handle layers, that you can then put things on walls, right? And here's one example of a student's work there. So that's the basic criteria that we came up with. Again, it was kind of identified by our student workshop instructor, and then it was kind of certified by the full-time staff, and then went out to the workshop. And that's the way I see most of our criteria being built, is that the student workshop instructors identify it, we kind of sign off on the full-time employee and on what those criteria are or should be, and then we go ahead and distribute those badges through Canvas. Now at this time we don't have a really great, okay, this, then this, then this, because our badge system doesn't have that display, and it doesn't have, and we're still debating what the prerequisites and hierarchy should be.
Great. We have a few more questions here. One was, let's see, well, I guess, and folks attending, I'll ask the questions kind of as I think they come in logically. How do you prove that another student isn't doing the work for for someone? How do you prove the authenticity of the work? Or do you worry about that?
So, I mean, part of it is that we trust them, and we don't worry about it much, because ultimately, if they aren't an expert in what they say they are, it's gonna show. The other thing is that this is authenticated via our UW Net ID system, and that's your login for the university, and giving your password to someone else is grounds for termination. It's a terrible, you're not supposed to do that anywhere, anytime, because then someone has access to your student records and has your social security number and your pay records, everything. So it is on that system. So I think, one, I don't think it will happen anyway, but it is also backed up by that.
Great, thank you. Two kind of similar questions. How successful has your program been in terms of student participation and completion? I'll ask that one first.
Okay. I think, like I said earlier, it's really, at this point, fits and starts. When we first released the system, we had a lot of students, running around looking for every badge that they could. Kind of in response to that, I actually created a couple of this Mad Badge Genius badge, which was a secret badge that you could only get if you found this one particular Canvas course that was kind of hidden, and then you did a number of different things, including reading a couple of articles on badges and then submitting a badge that we could approve. And that was a difficult one to get, and we had 3 students, walk through that. We also had a strong number of students getting the bug badges, and a couple of the other, exit through the gift shop basic image editing badges, and our staff training week attendee badge, which was our experiment with that kind of just you show up, you get a badge type of badge. Since then, it's really dwindled, and we were kind of hoping to see that student adoption and the student interest then drive the creation of a new set of badges, drive the creation of some of these hierarchies, and engage the students in thinking through what it takes to do their job and how they would measure that. We haven't seen that adoption at this point, and so while we think badges have a lot of potential to motivate students, the question right now is how do we motivate students to help us create the badge system, because I think we're at a point where we can't do it all on our own, partially because of the constraints of time. We have a lot of other projects we're working on. Also, partially because we don't always know everything that needs to go into all of these badges, or where the hierarchies would lead, what system you need access to, or what you need to know on the help desk before you know the next thing. If you're learning the Sound Studio for the first time, is it really important that you get your input-output right first, or can you do the MIDI, before that?
Yeah, I would agree. In the beginning, we definitely had people like, oh, can I get a badge for that? Oh, how about a badge for that? Oh, that should be a badge too. And people were really excited, but it also was right before the quarter started, so it was before they were getting into their studies. And, I think over time, over the quarter, their focus shifts, which makes sense. And I imagine that we will see another increase during the other breaks, especially when we get to summer, and maybe we can even put some more work into this and have some specific teams, student teams assigned to actually, grow this system.
Great, thank you. Similar vein, do you use any types of leaderboards at all? And again, I guess same idea, how do you make this more competitive for the students? Do the students know how each other's doing?
Yeah, so there actually is a display for now of an awards feed and just what badges people have received, who received it. We've talked to some extent about creating, instead of just a recent awards display, a most awards within the last 7 days, all of these pieces. We actually do have some concerns around motivation with that, because it creates it gets away from being skill-based and towards, just the collection of the badges. And so students, we're concerned that students, if they're kind of faced with that form of motivation, I get more than you, more badges than you, or I'm getting the first in badges, it creates a divide between the students who can dedicate a lot of time to it and the students who might be building some of those harder skills but can't dedicate as much time to getting the badges, or are getting the really tough badges, and other students are just looking for the easy, low-hanging fruit badges. And some of those issues, we've talked about it, we're interested, some students are more interested in that than others, but it really hasn't been something that we've invested in because of that kind of conflict of interest.
We have another question. Do you see this growing into any kind of quasi-curricular activity? Do you intend to expose this to the academic affairs folks just so they could be aware of it and can consider using something like this? Or are you just trying to kind of get it up and running to your satisfaction?
So I think our primary, we do that with the understanding that there is interest in this from the academy and from people building curriculum. And they come at that from a number of different points of view and languages. There's a fair amount of discussion, I know, in our School of Nursing about outcomes and how outcomes-based education should work, how competency-based education should work within our medical school. Sean Fullerton in the iSchool, he's coming at it primarily from the perspective of K through 12 education and how badges would integrate with the curriculum within that. So there is a lot of interest, a lot of approach there. I think part of the reason we want to really have this figured out and have it down is so that we can offer something really solid and a really solid building block for that for people who want to try it. So I would hope that we can eventually expose this stuff to the academy, but expose it once it's, once we've gone through the things that we need to go through to understand, okay, what do the criteria need to be? What's the hierarchy like? How do we display that hierarchy in such a way that students can really use it and can move from badge to badge, and then we can speak from that position of knowledge rather than just, oh, here's a cool piece of technology that you might like to try. It's kind of, it's nascent right now, but it has exciting potential. I think it's a tricky spot to be in because you want people excited about the new and upcoming things, but you also don't want to be showing your cards too early in the game and getting people really excited and involved in something that isn't ready yet.
Thank you. We also have, Ben's interested in, could you give an example of a really tough badge to obtain?
Yeah, so I think one of the really tough badges to obtain within our system is actually the Input-Output Pro badge. So we have a digital audio workstation, and it is very complicated in terms of its inputs and outputs. And one of the issues that we have all the time is that students reserve the space, go in, change the inputs and outputs, plug something in that they brought into the system, and then leave that set up as it was, and then walk back out, and the next person walks in, and maybe they're completely new to the digital audio workstation, and they are completely lost, of course, because the microphone that we already have in there isn't working, and the keyboard doesn't have an input, and all of that stuff. With really difficult badges to get, I would say we are also trying to figure out how, again, we can create tight gradients, right? How do you just talk about the keyboard being inputted, or the inputs and outputs of the keyboard? Could you get just your keyboard badge and that work your way up to the Input-Output Pro? But again, that takes student time to figure out, okay, what are those gradients? How do we measure them? How am I going to collect the evidence of that? I think on the flip side, right, that's a very, very hands-on skill. We go in, we unplug the keyboard, we watch and see if someone can figure it out. One of the really, really difficult badges that I'm hearing talk from the academy about as well is the critical thinking or the theoretical badges. We can measure, whether or not someone can plug the keyboard back in, change the inputs and outputs to give a correct output out of the speakers and into the recording systems. But what we have trouble measuring is whether or not someone understands how that's happening, right? The theoretical piece. Could they walk into a different setup with a different keyboard, with a different input and output, and transfer that knowledge over to that new scenario, right? And this comes up most often in my experience in the academic world in terms of critical thinking, in terms of problem solving, right? Are we teaching students just how to solve these singular problems, or are we teaching them kind of this broader skill set or the ability to transfer between? I think that's one of the most difficult ones to measure. It's certainly a very open question within the field, and something that we aren't testing at this point.
I would add to that, sort of bring it back to like help desk skills. How do we give maybe a badge on troubleshooting, right? Because that's kind of an amorphous sort of, like there are, yeah, okay, the first basic step is to reboot, right? But then after that, you have to have a mindset of critical thinking, of troubleshooting, and how do you teach someone how to be good at troubleshooting? So yeah, that's the struggle.
And even if you've taught them, how do you then measure that?
Yeah.
And just a similar question, but what was one of the easiest badges for the students to achieve?
Yeah. Yeah, so we had this. I mean, we had this fun games badge that was beat our boss Jacob in bowling, which was pretty easy for a lot of students to achieve. Fun to give out. It was actually interesting because whenever they achieved it, I had the QR code for the URL to claim that badge loaded onto my phone, and they'd essentially just come over to me with Jacob and say, "Hey, you know, I beat Jacob. Jacob would confirm it," and I'd show them the QR code on my phone, and they'd use their phones to claim it, which was a really interesting way of giving out badges. Um, we also had the staff training week attendee. Again, the attendance badges are really, really easy to give out. You show up in the room, we give you the URL, you say, don't share this URL with our friends, but we're not too worried about that because it's such a low value badge that we're just okay with saying, go here, click on this, and then we can disable that URL. As soon as people leave, we can say, all right, that URL is gone, even if they share it with their friends. Their friends can't use that URL to claim that badge. As far as skills go, I'd say that image investigator badge was one of the more easy ones to give, right? How do you find images that are Creative Commons? And that was just submit a URL. We check the URL to make sure that it's actually a Creative Commons search, and then we just are done.
Great, thank you. And I just have one probably final question. I'm intrigued by your collaboration. Michelle, could you have imagined doing this without Peter and his instructional design expertise?
Yeah.
And just even how did, do you work for the same department? Is that how you could both kind of get the time set aside to work on this together?
Right, yeah, so I definitely could not have done this without Peter, that's for sure. He did all of the research on badges, and so I thank him profusely for that. And we both work for Learning Technologies, and actually for a majority of the time that this project was going on, we shared an office, so it actually was pretty easy for us to collaborate on things. We aren't sharing an office now, but we are in the same building, and it's just a quick walk to each other.
So I would say, actually, to push back with Michelle on that a little bit, I think it may have become a longer process because I was involved. If it was just Michelle doing it on her own, we may have sought a less integrated, less tech-based version of this that was of a in our campus that actually works quite well. Is just essentially a skill board where each of the students is ranked with a number, and it's kind of up there on a whiteboard in front of everyone. And if you test for the next level, with someone who has, I think it's a ranking 2 ahead of you, you can then move up in your numbers, and that gives everyone a really quick, easy, I can see it right there, vision of where, excuse us, everyone is at, what basic skill level they have within the different systems that are there. I think we could argue back and forth about how much potential that has for the future, for future academic use and stuff like that. But I think the thing for us is, right, this is a chance to try out something and do something different and new, and that has some potential to be applicable more broadly, to work with the Mozilla Open Badge infrastructure and everything like that.
Great, thank you. I think there is one final question. How were the actual graphics for the badges developed? Graphic designer, auto-generated?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a mix of everything. We have some that were auto-generated. We have some that I actually went in and fiddled around with Photoshop in order to throw a bowling ball, as an overlay on a badge that we already had. We had some that were submitted by students, like this on the propagation of badges one, and the bug badge one. I think the student creation of badges, again, just not to keep coming back to that, but it's going to be an important piece.
Great. Well, I think we're pretty much right on schedule from a timing standpoint. I don't see any other questions. So, Peter and Michelle, I really want to thank you for sharing your exciting foray into badges. I know one of our attendees said sent his appreciation because this was his first exposure to badges, heard about it for a while and just interested to see what it's all about. So I think you gave a great both theoretical as well as a very practical application of badging and how it's being used in an institution with student employees. So thank you. And for those of you in attendance, this is recorded, so it should be available on our SIGUCCS website next week sometime if you are interested in reviewing any of the material that was covered. And I'm sure Peter and Michelle would be available for any direct email questions. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everyone very much for coming. Obviously we couldn't have done this presentation without you because we had about 20 minutes of material and 25 minutes of questions, and I think the questions were the best part. So thank you very much for being involved.
Thank you both. Goodbye, everyone. We'll have a webinar. Our next webinar will be in January.